that's cool.
All right, we're going to admit folks here. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We're just going to get a few things started and then we'll begin. All right, we're live. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Centennial Institute webinar on liberty and the economy amid the coronavirus pandemic. My name is Jeff Hunt, and I have the wonderful privilege of serving as the Vice President of Public Policy for Colorado Christian University, where I direct the university's think tank, the Centennial Institute. We are hosting a whole series of webinars to help people answer some of the many questions we're facing as a result of COVID-19. I want to encourage you to ask questions throughout this process on Zoom or the YouTube chat feature, and we'll do our best to answer them. We want to have a conversation, so ask away throughout the whole time we're talking today. We're going to discuss today liberty and the economy amid the coronavirus pandemic. Is the cure and its consequences on our economy worse than the coronavirus itself? How do we balance the medical and economic issues in this pandemic? What about freedom of assembly and our constitutional rights? Will our government grow permanently because of this pandemic? Friends, I can't think of a better person to help us understand all this than the great John Callender. John has been a wonderful friend. In fact, we often joke he's the brother from the same father. John Andrews not only started the Centennial Institute, he started the Independence Institute, but John Callender is a fantastic fighter for liberty and freedom. He is a gift to the state of Colorado. He's the president of the Independence Institute, Colorado's free market think tank in Denver, Colorado. He also hosts radio talk show programs on 630 KHOW and 850 KOA. He is a regular columnist for the Colorado Springs Gazette. His current affairs television program, The Devil's Advocate with John Callender, airs on Colorado Public Television, Channel 12, Friday nights at 8:30. John works to secure our right to freely associate by promoting liberty, protected by limited government. John, thanks so much for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing terrific. I'm so glad to see you're not wearing a necktie. I didn't know if you would do that at home, so it's a relief, really.
I did take the tie off for a little bit, at least during the coronavirus, right? John, we've got you had a wonderful column out here just recently. Let me find it. I went to print it and it did this for me.
Oh God! Well, there's a reason why I grew a mustache and a beard, so other people wouldn't draw it on my photograph. So,
well, it is. It's almost big enough to where I could put it on my wall here. I could tape it up there like you did when you were a teenager, kind of put your fans and heroes up on the wall. But John, why don't you give folks your background a little bit as we begin? Because you've been a great defender of liberty and freedom for decades now. Share with us a little bit of your background.
Oh, my background isn't as important. I agree with you. We both owe a debt to John Andrews. If it weren't for John Andrews, the only thing I would be saying into this microphone is, would you like fries with that? He not only started the Independence Institute, he also started the Centennial Institute, and two great organizations that fight for freedom in Colorado and partner up wherever we can. It's been terrific. I think we ought to jump right into the issue that I think most people have been really worried about, is that they don't know what to think. They don't know what is real. It's almost like there's a fog of war going on where we don't really know who to believe and what's real. So in that area, fear has the upper hand. And fear certainly has been driving policy in Colorado and around the nation. First, let me make it really clear. I hope everybody watching is taking care of themselves, socially distancing, washing their hands. I mean, this is very real for me. I've got a severely handicapped son who would be vulnerable to the virus. I've got two parents who are getting on in age and they're also very vulnerable. So this is real to me. But at the same time, I am more fearful of the government reaction to this and the long-term possibilities of government growth than I am about the virus. And when I think about what people are going through today, It is government that is causing the most disruption in their lives, not this virus.
Well, and I think it's important to point out there's been this dichotomy that's been created by the media that if you're questioning the government right now, if you're skeptical of all the orders that are coming down and kind of the growth of government that's taking place, that somehow you want grandma to die or you're willing to sacrifice her for $1. I've even gotten emails like that. And that's not the truth at all. In fact, throughout our history, we've had to wrestle with these consequences in time of war and other pandemics. How do constitutional rights exist with a government that's trying to act in the midst of an emergency? And how do we balance all those? And the idea that just because we're questioning it doesn't mean that we're falling into the category of willing to sacrifice family members. John, as you pointed out, you have personal family. My wife has asthma. She's a high risk category under this. My grandfather is 85 years old or 95 years old. He's in a nursing home. He's a World War II vet. This is personal to everybody, but at the same time, it's not a blank check. An emergency is not a blank check to throw out our Constitution. It's not a blank check to spend whatever money you want to spend. And we've got to be able to challenge and push back. And I think the Independence Institute, through your article, maybe you could talk a little bit about that through Nadelson's work, Rob Nadelson, who's one of your scholars, have been questioning this. And you've even been working with the governor to try to loosen regulations. Can you talk a little bit about all those?
Yeah, let me work backwards first, which is, let me thank Governor Polis for listening to us, reaching out to us, taking some of our ideas on deregulation. He's used many of his emergency powers to make deregulation in certain ways easier. He's allowed for licensing out of state for medical professionals to be valid here. He has he's done several deregulatory things in the short run. I'm worried that there's a difference between the short run, where we can loosen some regulations, and the long run, where this crisis will be used to expand government. This will be the siren call for more unemployment benefits permanently. This will be a call for Medicare for all, socialized health care. This will be the call for a Family Leave Act. Those are permanent moves to the left. We all know that no good crisis should go to waste, and they're not going to waste this crisis. Let me talk a little bit about what you mentioned about constitutional rights. The Constitution is there not for when times are great. The constitutional rights we have for free assembly, our freedom to worship, our freedom to keep and bear arms are not there in good times, and they're not there for the majority. They're there for the political minority. They're there for people who are being told they can't live that way. They can't hang out with those people. They can't say those things. They can't go to that house of worship. That's why our founders created that Bill of Rights. And it has been stunning to me to see how quickly people will turn their back on those rights and not say, wait a second, yeah, this is an emergency, but does that mean the Constitution floats away? I've always thought that the Constitution is there in times of emergency even more. That's what it's there for. You and I are the age, let's be honest, we've never really seen economic hardship. We saw the Great Recession back in high school. I remember the stagnation under Carter and the early years of Reagan, but that was Dad's problem. I was still chasing skirts in high school. We've never seen real war. We've never seen real depression. We've never seen our country ripped apart. And therefore, it's very easy to scare us. And it's amazing how particularly younger people are bullied, I think, by the media to panic and to accept larger roles in government, and for them to say, you're under house arrest. We're now under house arrest. You and I are communicating from our homes because we're under house arrest without due process. If that doesn't get our attention, I'm not too sure what should. Let me go one further. Growing up in the 70s and early 80s, I grew up in that era of the ACLU fighting for neo-Nazis' right to have a free speech in Skokie, Illinois. I mean, think about that. You've got a bunch of lawyers on the left, many of them Jewish, who are fighting for the right of neo-Nazis who want to kill them to have their First Amendment rights. That's incredibly brave. And I remember People for the American Way. I remember every TV show, every cop drama. I remember Archie Bunker. And underneath it all was this message of the ends don't justify the means, that due process matters. You're innocent until proven guilty. And the news media echoed that, whether it was 60 Minutes or any of the great news anchors. Now it's completely switched. We have media who says, don't ask questions. Do what you can to save lives. Saving lives is more important than anything else, even though in the long run, it could cause economic devastation, which will cost more lives. But I'm so disappointed that the intellectual left has been consumed by the progressive movement and now are shuddering in fear to stand up and say, wait a second, don't the ends not justify the means? Don't we care about due process? I'm wondering where they are. And I'm hearing a chorus of crickets when it comes from the people I thought would stand up. And it shows me two things. One, that either those liberals, when you and I were young, have all grown up and died, or that the progressive movement has become so vicious, so overwhelming that they've gobbled up that part of the center left, and they need to be quiet too. It's concerning. You always wonder, how is it that Hitler takes power? How is it that something like that could even happen? How is it, you mentioned it before, how is it that people go, we need to put Japanese Americans into prison camps? Why? Because people are afraid, and when people are afraid, they're easily directed to something that gives the illusion of security. I'm surprised that it's conservatives and libertarians and not civil libertarians on the left screaming, wait, let's slow down here and ask some tough questions. If they are, they're not asking it loud enough for me to hear.
Well, and I think it goes to this idea that even asking a question is somehow a mistrust, or you're not willing to obey the orders. I mean, we saw this recently on the Tri-County health order that came down in Douglas County, where I live, where we all started looking around going, wait a second, an unelected bureaucrat just shut down the county? Well, we don't think that's right. This should be
unelected bureaucrat put you under house arrest.
Right.
I mean, an unelected bureaucrat put you under house arrest, and there's not even an elected official that has some illusion of accountability to the constituents. If you're not scared about that, if you're not pissed off about that, you are not paying attention.
Well, and so we had a number of elected officials here in Colorado or in Douglas County that raised those issues, going, we're not sure this is right. And how did the media treat them? As if they're encouraging 1,000-person gatherings in town square to spread the coronavirus around. So the idea that you can even question the legality or the constitutionality of some of these rules and laws, the media treats you as if you're trying to kill grandma or willing to sell her and her life to earn money. And so we've lost that notion of the ability to even question. We see it on college campuses all the time. I work a lot with youth where they can't even question liberal dogma without receiving a bad grade. I mean, it's puritanical, the way they get into groupthink. One thing that came up, and the governor gave a very compelling presentation yesterday with stats and data on what could happen if we don't socially isolate, the amount of people that could die. And there were two things that I wish the press had come out with on that. One was making sure that the data is right. So if this data is right, then the governor is justified in many ways for trying to do everything he can to flatten the curve. I mean, the idea that 32,000 people could be dead as a result of this by June is frightening. And that's really important if the data is right on that. And there's been outlets like the Federalists that have questioned this data, and they've been silenced on Twitter and other things like that. So I want to make sure that we're not just accepting what's coming down and making very big decisions on that data. We got to make sure the data is right. But then secondly, there's this really bizarre moment that no media picked up on, where the governor is saying who you can play Frisbee with. I mean, I can't believe we live in a country where we have to ask the governor who you can play Frisbee with. He was talking about how you can play Frisbee with your wife or your spouse, but you couldn't play Frisbee with your next door neighbor. And I'm sitting there going, how is no one even talking about this? The fact that and then was part of calls later where, we're having to parse whether or not a dog grooming business in Douglas County can still function, but a liquor store or marijuana store or another business of a tailor or dry cleaning business can still function. We're having to parse these all out. And I'm thinking to myself,
let me ask the question, what is an essential business?
Right.
And so the governor put us under house arrest statewide, but the definition of what is an essential business largely resides in our local governments. So the city and county of Denver and the Tri-County Health Department will decide what is essential. Let me say that any business that employs you is pretty darn essential. Any business that provides what you believe to be an essential service, whether it's to buy your Coors Light or to buy your recreational marijuana or a cigar, that might be essential to you. And so if a liquor store is essential and a pot shop is essential, then pretty much anything that brings comfort, relaxation, and a sense of normalcy is also essential. We at the Independence Institute produce CompleteColorado.com. I hope everyone who watches this goes there daily. That's where you get the most COVID coverage for Colorado, which is some of the best alliteration I just came up with. And we also do a lot of videos. We have 3 different studios for podcasts, radio programs, video casts, our television program. We are part of the media. So we proudly slapped a sign on our door, thanks to our lawyers, saying we are an essential business under this code. Please challenge us. And you can close us down as soon as you close 9 News down. I was going to say the Denver Post, but they're not even in Denver any longer. And who is essential? So we have taken that choice of what is essential, taken it away from the individual, given it to an expert. This is a terrifying time. Listen, this bug is going to go away. We will get over this crisis. What is left afterwards will be more government, more regulation, more dollars printed out of thin air. And what I can care the most about is a growing acceptance of government making big choices for our individual lives. I wondered where the anger was over these lockdowns, and someone told me, what are you talking about, Caldera? Ever since Columbine, we have been training our children to be locked down at schools under people's orders. So they have been trained since they were 6 years old to accept a lockdown order as a way to save their lives. Now that many of them are often have families of their own, when the government says lockdown, well, we've trained them. You lock down. It's not house arrest, it's just following orders. I think we need to take some real time and really question what the governor is doing here.
Now, John, I'm going to play devil's advocate. You got a show called Devil's Advocate. The governor's looking at data here that says if we don't do drastic actions right now, and I've talked to even conservatives who feel this way, not just liberals, but if we don't do drastic action now, Colorado itself could see 30,000 deaths by June. We're in the midst of an emergency. We need to shut this state down. We need to keep people in their homes to flatten the curve because lives are at stake. And if we don't act, we're going to face serious suffering and even economic hardship after that. So the best thing to do for the economy and for the long term is to face severe shutdown now and try to come out of this in the next month. What say you?
The Wall Street Journal editorial today or yesterday had a wonderful look at the guy who came up with all these models, and he is readjusting his models. And yeah, it's really great to stoke the fires of fear with the worst case scenarios. Those worst case place scenarios, that's a nice way to say it. These worst case scenarios are a little, well, they're fear mongering. I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about this. There are regulations and things that we can do to change and flatten that curve, including social distancing. It's one thing to require restaurants to make sure that every table is at least 6 feet away from some other table. That's very different than closing down a business and saying you're not allowed to work. So somehow the kitchen staff can still work closely together, but if I'm 10 feet away from somebody else, I'm not going to infect them. We can keep those businesses open. The same thing happens with closing down churches. There's a way to bring people together and still keep them safe. This either or is a very dangerous thing. Now, conservatives are usually accused of looking at the world in very black and white issues. Might I say, those who say that the government should take away our rights, they're looking at black and white issues. They're looking at a worst case scenario. And also, we're training our kids, we're training ourselves that the government knows best, and we shouldn't use any of our own judgment. I think our own judgment means that if you're going to go and deal with people in those high-risk areas, extra precautions should be required. But instead of isolating those people, we're all under house arrest. I agree with the governor. We should do all we reasonably can do. That doesn't mean we bring in a police state to shut down businesses. Read in the news today that there are several businesses that have been reprimanded from Aurora and Denver for being open, or heaven forbid, allowing somebody to drink a beer while they're waiting for their food to be prepared. That makes them a bar, and now they're being shut down. There's a reasonable test here. To close down small towns in rural Colorado under this threat is insane. The idea that we're going to turn off the economy is insane. Let me put it this way. There's a reason we in the West live longer than people in poor third world countries. Wealth creates health. You cannot redistribute wealth until you first create it. And if we want to keep people healthy, we need to keep our economy healthy. I worry in the long term, this cure of people not going to work, printing money and rewarding people for not working is very dangerous. Let me wax on one more minute. I know we go something like this. You have taken the worker class. You've taken those people with small businesses who have risked everything. They've risked their livelihoods. They've risked their homes to put up for loans. They've risked years to try to make a go of it. These are real Americans. These are people who take risk to create wealth. We have now taken them from the wealth creation and put them into the dependency class. Now we'll give them some loans. We might forgive those loans. We're going to help them with their payroll. And now all of a sudden we've switched them from wealth creators to wealth takers. That is a moral hazard.
And that affects everything from proposed green legislation to paid family leave to minimum wage laws to even Andrew Yang's idea of just receiving, was it $4,000 a month or something like that, and getting rid of the social safety net issues. So I think there is a concern, absolutely, that we're going to come out of this and government is going to get a lot more power. My grandfather, who I mentioned, 95-year-old World War II vet stationed on Tinian Island, working on the B-29 Superfortress, has said, Jeff, there's one thing for sure. I've been alive since Calvin Coolidge. The government gets bigger. And I think we're going to see that happen here as well. One thing you pointed out in your article in the Gazette, and I think this is really important for people to understand, and this was the point I made about Tri-County Health's declaration, is that generally an elected official has to weigh all the different considerations. So they've got to think through the business, economic, financial, educational issues when they make an order. But Tri-County Health really can only focus primarily on health. And so if they're driven primarily by health decisions, they will make orders driven by that priority. And you mentioned it here about World Health Organization, CDC. They're all looking through the eyes of medical and not necessarily taking into consideration these other issues that you're talking about. Can you share a little bit about your position on that?
Someone in leadership like the president or the governor is supposed to balance a lot of competing interests, as we do in our own home lives. We have desires to go on vacation constantly, but we also want to save up some money for our retirement or our kids' education. We're trying to balance these very different things. Well, if you're a 12-year-old kid or an 8-year-old kid, your goal is to go to Disneyland and you want to lobby your dad to take you to Disneyland. That's terrific. That makes perfect sense. That's your worldview. In politics and policy, there are those people who are paid to have a worldview. The CDC, the Department of Health here, WHO are all paid to look at the world from one point of view. How do we flatten this curve? How do we flatten this curve? And the idea of a marketplace and market forces, or even individual liberties, are nothing more than obstacles to overcome in order to flatten that curve. I use this analogy. If engineers were building power lines from your power plant to your home, how would they build them? Well, they want the most efficient conductor possible. That would be gold and silver. Your power lines would be made of gold because that makes the best sense from an engineering point of view. And so from their point of view, that's how they would build it. CDC is doing the same thing. From their point of view, home arrest is the best thing we can do to flatten this curve. But leaders have to balance these issues. So the CDC has no priority when it comes to market safety. It has nothing to do with making sure that the market is there, that unemployment doesn't go crazy, that we don't have a complete collapse, that we don't have a depressions which have led to wars and all sorts of terrible things and decades of disease. That's not their concern. Their concern is flattening this curve. And so when the governor takes those numbers and says, look, 30,000 people could die, worst case scenario, but can't we also say, look what you're doing? You're rushing us into a depression, which could have even more violent implications over time. Not to mention, you took an oath to the Constitution. Maybe you should keep that oath.
One thing you brought up too in your article that I appreciated was the issue of education. I used to manage, prior to this position, the Colorado Coalition of Cyber School Families. So all the families that just wanted to have the right to be able to educate their children using online platforms. And it's amazing the pushback we used to get, primarily from teachers' unions, that somehow the brick and mortar was the only place where kids could be educated. And the idea that you would even try to expand that and online wasn't good, and it didn't replicate the same quality of experience that someone would have in the classroom. And we were just fighting for the rights of parents to choose the best education for their children. Now everything's gone online, and those brick and mortar union run schools are the ones that are having the hardest time adapting to this. Thank God we didn't give up and we kept fighting. And for the last 10 years, we've innovated in online education. But the big government programs are the worst ones to adapt in a situation like this. Thank God we live in a pro-charter, pro-school choice state where parents can choose, and we've innovated. And I think we're absorbing this a lot better than if we were just.
Let me disagree with you. I don't believe we're in a pro-choice, pro-charter school state when it comes to education. I believe that we have a progressive legislature that's trying to limit those choices.
Right.
Let me tell the story of Golden Classical View Academy in Jefferson County. This is a classical liberal grade school. focusing on classic literature and reading, writing, and the basics. They almost did not exist. In fact, if it wasn't for that school board that the left hated so much and ended up recalling in Jefferson County, that little charter school with 500 kids wouldn't exist. So I've got several friends who have their kids there. On a Thursday, they decided we're not going to have class on Friday. Over the weekend, this school that does not rely on computers, they rely on paper books, figured out how to get every one of their kids a Google account, a computer if necessary, got every class switched over to an online format so that by Monday they could start teaching all their kids. They missed 1 or 2 days of education. To think that this little school could be that flexible, but yet DPS and other school districts cannot come up with those answers fast enough shows that we're robbing our kids of education. There are a lot of opportunities here. And while you and I do what conservatives and libertarians do so well, which is say what the dangers are, I think it's worth pointing out some of the incredible advantages here. One, what you and I are doing right now. People are becoming very tech savvy about what can happen at home and working at home. There have been a lot of people who've been very hesitant to allow workers to telework. Now it's going to become the norm very quickly. There's going to be a lot of advantages to that. As we look forward to post Corona, there are several policies we'd like to see continue. Not only these deregulation, the delicensing, a whole bunch of hashtag never needed rules and regulation that should be pulled aside and left gone forever. We can see a few things that we'd like to see happen in the long run. I'll give you a couple that work for me. Our legislature cannot meet right now because they're in recess over this. I think they should either stay in recess forever, which would be terrific, but sooner or later they're going to come back and start doing what they do. There is no way for them to legally televote yet. That is to stay in their districts and vote and be at committee hearings. We're pushing an idea to allow legislators and hopefully at some point Congress and senators to stay in their home districts and still attend cyber committee meetings and vote, make motions where all of us can watch and allow people to teletestify as well. So you don't have to go over the mountains just to be gavelled down when you want to have your say. There's a couple reasons I want this. One is that it means that business can get done, but it also diffuses the infrastructure that lobbies our legislature. If you are in your hometown in Lyman, Colorado, it's going to be a long drive for that lobbyist to come, wine, dine you, make you feel special. Oh, and your constituents will be knocking on your door because they don't have to travel to Denver to push for your vote. So I'd love to see if you and I can work from home and still have meetings. Well, then the people who are controlling our lives should be able to do the same thing and stay in their districts. As you know, mobility has been one of my passions for 3 decades now. I believe that economically speaking, show me a man whose mobility is limited to how far his legs will take him, and I'll show you a man in despair. That's why I don't mind spending money to help transit-dependent people get around. I despise the way we do it, which is to give that massive 90 to 95% subsidy for transit agencies like RTD to spend so that guys who have cars don't have to pay for parking when they go to a Rockies game. What we ought to do is voucherize that subsidy and give it directly to transit dependents, people too old, too infirmed, maybe unemployed, too poor to have a car. Let them have the choice between riding the bus at full fare, which would be 10 times the price as what the fare is now, or riding an Uber or a Lyft, or taking a carpool for profit, taking a taxi, or God forbid, buying their own $500 used car like I did in college and start their lives with it. So we can empower people not by giving them services, but by giving them direct money. I think there are a lot of ways we can waive requirements from Medicaid. Under Bill Owens, there was a consumer directed assistance program. This was something that allowed people who were on Medicaid, instead of having a home health care aide that was delivered to them by the government or through one of the agencies, they were able to get money instead, and they could hire who they wanted to hire, pay them perhaps a little more on holidays so that they could be there, because a lot of times they wouldn't show on Christmas, or pay them a little less other times. And the savings would be split between the state and the people who were getting the subsidies. So they had an incentive to try to economize. Bill Ritter ended up stopping that program. I've talked to the governor and I said, this is a program you need to put back in to empower people, because a family member, somebody down the street, might be a home health care aide for someone on Medicaid, and it will be safer for the disease, but also empower them with those choices. He seemed interested in that, and we'll see where it goes. But there's a whole host of policy changes we can make now if we really pressure government to do so. Some the governor can do on his own, but a lot has to happen from localities and other places. I'm thrilled that the governor, for instance, in one of his press conferences, took our suggestion and used his pulpit to tell local governments to get rid of their bag tax or bag fees, because guess what? Single-use plastic is much more hygienic. And so those cities like mine and Boulder, which want to tell us how to carry home our groceries, shouldn't do that. Those are the kind of things that should turn permanent after this crisis.
Well, and I think the Independence Institute is uniquely positioned to help think through all the ways local localities can work through this. You've got Kathleen Chandler there, and she just commented on this too. How can we think innovatively through this process? I love the way the Independence Institute works on that. One thing I wanted to point out in your article that I appreciated was, I think we've proved the left that inequality does exist. As conservatives, we believe that there's a natural hierarchy that develops, and we don't really have a problem with it. So if you're brilliant and you study for 20 years and you're a brain surgeon, you should be paid more as a result of that. We don't have a problem with that. We don't care about equal outcomes. There's natural hierarchies that exist out there. But you've pointed out here that because they've identified that there are, quote, essential businesses, then there is an inequality that generally exists. They seem to fall into that. Other things that they've done that I've appreciated that I think we'll be able to point out to them in the future is that religious communities are essential. I appreciate that. There are many in the left that felt like we're akin to racists and bigots and should be forced out. I appreciate the fact that in some localities, Denver not being one of them, but Colorado at least, recognizing that gun stores are essential businesses. So have we proved now that natural inequalities do exist and that it's not all about equal outcome? Because if it was about equal outcome, the governor or the government workers would not be receiving a paycheck, just like the waitresses aren't right now.
The left progressives believe in equality of outcome. Not equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. And well, then where is the equality of outcome where the private sector is being destroyed, but yet every government employee is still getting a paycheck? It seems to me that if a third of Colorado is now going on unemployment and losing their jobs, well, then a third of government should lose their jobs too. I can't see where the Office of Tourism should be getting a paycheck right now when everything is closed down and you can't come to Colorado. That is not an essential office. I can see where the Department of Health is an essential office. So if you really care about equality of outcome, to my friends on the left, I say, then you've got to close down large swaths of government, use those funds for this emergency, and let those people be unemployed. And Governor, you need to feel what it feels like to have to choose which employees you're going to lay off. Those are tough decisions that those of us in the private sector have to make, and it's difficult. Give me some equality of outcome, progressives. I want to see it.
Now's their time to shine. Rob Natelson has done a great work on Complete Colorado. You mentioned it before. He's written 2 articles just recently. Denver's lockdown order, probably unconstitutional. Polish lockdown order adds chaos to unconstitutionality. Rob is a fellow with you all, but has spent, is a retired constitutional law professor, constitutional historian, senior fellow in constitutional jurisprudence at the Independence Institute. He essentially argues that these bans are going to be found unconstitutional once we get through this. The judicial process, and we learned this from Fred Yarger yesterday, is deliberate and is deliberately slow for a reason. The judges tend to stay out of the executive branch in the midst of emergencies and let them kind of do their thing. So this is a lot of stuff we're probably going to end up having to litigate later. But he does point out that these are likely unconstitutional because of the restrictions on travel, the freedom to travel, even though it's not explicitly stated in the Constitution. The Supreme Court has found that to be a right on par with many of our freedoms that are protected in the Constitution. The freedom of assembly, the freedom against takings. And Rob points out that because the order is in many ways very political, it's also probably unconstitutional. He's got a great line where he says that the law needs to be narrowly tailored to advance compelling government purposes. And if it's narrowly tailored, and he lists all these different problems with it, then we wouldn't have marijuana and liquor stores open while dry cleaning stores are closed, because you're picking winners and losers for political purposes. Basically, he points out that marijuana and alcohol have strong lobbies, and the tobacco stores like Smoker's Choice or Smoker's Friends can open because their lobbyists aren't nearly as strong. And so we face a constitutional problem there as well. What say you, John Caldera?
It is a good thing when government grows to be in favor with those in power. And so pot shops are in favor with those in power, and those who sell cigars are not. That's one of the problems and one of the telltale signs of communism. Those people who were party members got better health care than the poor people who were not. You did not have equality of outcome. First, hats off to Rob Natelson. What a mild-mannered guy who is just hated by so many people who want government control because he just quietly puts out the facts. We have a team of lawyers at Independence Institute who always work on these issues. I'll give you a case in point. The Colorado Constitution is very clear. It says our legislative session shall be 120 calendar days. The legislature has decided to recess for a couple of weeks because of the coronavirus. And of course, the left wants to add those days back at the end of the 120 days. They say, well, 120 days, well, that includes all these other days. Those are only work days, not calendar days. Fortunately, Dave Kopel, who is one of the nation's experts on Second Amendment rights, is also one of the few guys who understands the Colorado Constitution. And the only one I know of that has written a textbook on the Colorado Constitution. The legal brief that was worked on by Shane Madsen, who runs our Center for Political Law, and Natelson and Dave Kopel has now been put in, and we will argue as best we can to the High Court that 120 days, as the Constitution says, is exactly what it meant, 120 days. And we're pointing back to the amendment that created the 120-day session. So it really is amazing that these long-term infrastructure builds that organizations like Independence do and Centennial, the things that we do pay off. That is, if we hadn't had Rob Natelson and Dave and Shane Madsen there for years building and building and building, when a crisis like this happens, we would not have the brain trust and the ability to come in and show what is right and what is wrong. And it's one of the tough things. And I think folks who support Centennial Institute and folks who support the Independence Institute understand that difference, that it's important to give money to politicians who are running for office, but it's just as important, if not more so, to give money and support to those organizations who build infrastructure over time So when a crisis like this happens, we're there to fight it. Last year, when they tried to destroy the Taxpayer Bill of Rights again, the Independence Institute was there to lock arms with Centennial and so many other great organizations because we were there at the beginning. If not for Independence Institute, we wouldn't have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We wouldn't have term limits. We would not have charter schools. We would not have concealed carry laws. We would not have online education and a school report card. We wouldn't have the choices we have now. And the investment that people make by tithing to these organizations that are not just there to promote a politician or a party has more impact over the long run. So to everyone who has helped Independence and Centennial, thank you. And let me be real self-serving here. In this time of crisis where we are facing, all of us, budgetary constraints, organizations that have long-term impact, whether it's CCU or Independence Institute or others, they're the ones that need the most funding now so we can fight these type of crises. If we go away, imagine what Colorado looks like.
And on that note, friends, I want to let you know today I'm going to be making a donation to the Independence Institute because of all their great work keeping an eye on our government in the midst of this emergency. Complete Colorado is a huge resource. Rob Nadelson, John Callender, the writings there. I'm supporting them because we're in the midst of a pandemic. Absolutely. We need to take it seriously, but we've got to have an eye on our government. And they've done things to warrant us having our eyes on them. Look at just the pork spending that came through in the bill that Nancy Pelosi was running, that we had to work to try to get as much of it as we could out. Never miss an opportunity to expand government is what happens when you put the left in control. And so we've got to keep an eye on them. And the Independence Institute's doing a wonderful job. And I'm so proud to call them friends. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. But I do want to just raise for you, we are going to face a battle over Tabor on this. They will say we don't have enough money to cover what we need to on these programs. If we didn't have Tabor, we could have all this money. And the argument that I've heard is that because of Tabor, we're going to absorb this economic hit better. Tabor, as you know, puts a cap on what the state can collect and what the state can spend. Last year, they were forced to refund money back to the citizens of Colorado. If we didn't have Tabor, the hit that would have come to these government programs would have been far bigger than what it's going to be as a result of this pandemic. Now, we are going to take a hit. We're not going to have the revenue that we did last year. And so social programs in the state of Colorado are going to have to tighten their budget. But if it was as big as they wanted it to be, if they had kept the refunds, the hit would have been much bigger and social programs would have taken a much drastic hit as opposed to having Tabor. John, what do you see as the importance of defending Tabor in this pandemic?
The first thought that comes to mind is that of narrative. And you hit it on the head, Jeff, that they're going to say, oh my God, if only we could have kept more money, we would be ready for this. No, that's a fib. The money would have gone in and gone out. We can say, thank God we defeated all these attacks on Tabor and tax increases, because guess what? That meant more money in the hands of the people who needed the money, people who now have a little extra money because of defeating Prop CC and others, that they can buy a bit more food, they can buy some more clothes for their kids, they can take care of those things. That's crucial. Let me also say that this is an opportunity. This is a huge opportunity. Government does not innovate. Let me say it again. Government doesn't innovate because they have no competition. There's no reason to innovate. The only time there is innovation in government is when budgets are tight. That's when innovation can happen. That's the time we should be excited. Now, they will always scream, we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't do it. I look at my old stomping ground of the RTD, Regional Transportation District. We were required to competitively contract out 20% of our fixed route buses. The savings was 40%. That was not just because of lower wages, a little bit that, but mostly because of work rules. The in-house union, you could only hire people for at least 8 to 10 hours, not part-time during rush hour. That person who drove in the bus couldn't be the same person that cleaned the bus, that couldn't be the same person that repaired the bus. The private operators get to enjoy more flexibility. So if you want more service at RTD, you contract out the rest. That is a tale that can be used in government after government after government. I think Steve Goldblum, mayor of Indianapolis years ago, called it the yellow pages test. If I can find a business in the yellow pages that can do this business, government shouldn't. We should just contract it out. Of course, now we'd have to figure out what the yellow pages is, because I don't think it exists anymore, but I think the idea continues. This is an opportunity to ask, what is the core function of government? Is the core function of government to put 1 out of every 4 Coloradans on Medicaid, as they are right now? Is the core function of government to decide what sex ed you should be taught, forced to taught in school, and what transgendered classes should be forced? Is government's job to put a stranglehold on one of our top industries, oil and gas, and kill the tax flow that comes from that and the jobs created from that? I welcome this. Bring it on. Let's have this conversation. What should government be doing at what level? And oh, by the way, all these policies that are stifling growth, including anti-growth laws, laws that say you can't build here, urban growth boundaries, maybe it's time to look at these laws and saying what we need is to create wealth so we can get people employed and government can make more in revenues as well. This is going to be painful, but we have to steer this narrative because the left and their friends in the media certainly will.
Yeah. John, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap us up here. We've got to be watching what's happening. We've got to be engaged. We've got to be questioning the laws that are coming down. That is not unpatriotic. We need to stand strong with the Constitution and the rights and privileges that it protects. And we've got to watch it, how all this is going to turn out. We're not going to be in a state of emergency forever. I think we've all learned a really important lesson through this, that there are existing statutes and existing laws that we need to have a serious conversation about once this is done. The fact that an unelected bureaucrat can shut down 3 counties while the county commissioners are opposed to it, that's something that's got to change when we get back in the legislature. So I'm so grateful for the Independence Institute and for the partnership we have between Centennial and Independence. We don't always work on the same issues, but we're always pointed in the same direction of supporting freedom and our constitutional rights. And we owe that to John Andrews. So as we close here, I want to make sure we do a hat tip to the great John Andrews, who is kind of the Johnny Appleseed around America, who started all these great think tanks, not just ours, but other ones in different states as well. And as part of the foundation of the State Policy Network. So John, thank you again for your time today. I'll give you any final closing words, and then I've just got a quick announcement once we're done here.
First of all, thanks for doing this and keeping people connected. It's important that you don't feel alone during this time. And for those of us who are thinking, am I crazy for questioning what's going on? I think it's important for guys like you, Jeff, and Centennial to say, no, these are worthwhile conversations to have. I invite everyone to go to Independence Institute, go to thinkfreedom.org. That's thinkfreedom.org. And if you don't go to completecolorado.com at least twice a day, because we update all of our stories twice a day, you're missing out on the best free news service there is. We aggregate news, and Complete has its own reporters taking on stories that others won't. Consider Complete Colorado the un-media of Colorado, and it's really worth being part of. Please, take all this seriously. But I agree with you, Jeff. There's something going on here that we need to be much more cognizant of. This is a virus. That's it, a virus. It is a really nasty flu with a higher mortality rate and a higher contingency rate. What happens if we weren't flying high under the Trump economy? What if unemployment was still at a record high instead of a record low? What if wages were shrinking at the lower ends of the spectrum? Wages have been growing for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum faster than those at the higher end in the last year. These are the things that I think the left hates. Imagine what would have happened if we started from there. What we learn from this experience will either help or destroy future generations. So this is no time to be bashful. Let me throw in one other pitch. Kathleen Chandler at the Independence Institute runs a local government project. Her job is to try to tease people into serving in local government, not necessarily in a elected fashion, but on boards and commissions, because that turns out to be their farm team. And our team, we're too busy working and supporting our families to tell other people how to live. I think there was a time when we gave of ourselves to our local governments, and I think we need to do so now, because that's how they get away with this. It's not just that they have the elected officials, but they have the boards and commissions underneath those officials. So check out the local government project in Independence as well. And let's keep on keeping on.
Great, John. Thanks so much for your time today. As a few closing announcements here, this next week, we're going to do a series of webinars on everything from the biology of coronavirus to what CCU is doing to prepare nurses for this pandemic, how teachers are responding. We're going to have Deb Scheffel, the State Board of Education, talking to us about that. So you can get on our email list if you go to our website, ccu.edu/centennial. We'll update you as we get those scheduled. Finally, if you're at home, this is a wonderful time to complete that degree you've always thought about, the associate's, bachelor's, master's, or even doctoral degree at Colorado Christian University. Do you know we have 7,000 students online? 88% of them qualify for financial aid. So if this is something that you're thinking of doing, we can help work with you to achieve that. Over 80 programs to choose from, and the average class size, only 11 people. CCU is a conservative school, but it's most importantly a Christian school. And if you're looking to get that degree, now is the time to do it. You can do it all online. So check out ccu.edu. Thanks so much for joining us today. God bless you, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.